So at yesterday's conference, the consensus was that trade wars and their impact was the main worry among attendees. But are you slightly more optimistic around trade wars and therefore their impact? We seem to have some breakthrough in Mexico, for example, but the big one's still China. What are your expectations here?
Yeah, I guess that certainly with China, there are many chapters to that story. Maybe the first chapter gets resolved reasonably quickly. If you row back and say what's Donald Trump's and it's all about the US administration, to get re-elected he has to deliver on some of his promises. He can blame Congress for not doing the wall, he can blame Congress for some other things, but trade is his thing, and he could argue he's done something with the Mexicans and the Canadians, but he really needs to have some symbolic or better victory with China in order that he can start campaigning. And in fact, then he can turn his attention to Germany. So I suspect he's strongly motivated, but there are those around him like Lighthizer and Wilbur Ross who maybe take a harder line as opposed to wanting a symbolic victory.
Just moving on slightly to the subject of geopolitics, the escalation of tension in the Middle East with oil tankers being attacked, that must be, in addition to trade wars, another one of your big concerns going forward.
It is a big concern. I mean, it would have been a much bigger concern 15 or 20 years ago. I mean, what normally happens, as we know, is you have a spasm of activity. People get concerned about a physical interruption of the supply, but then it damps down pretty quickly. But it's the physical interruption of supply that's kept people awake at night. But I think, the shale and the whole calculation of where oil can come from has really changed that calculus. But there's no doubt the Straits of Hormuz at the moment is a pinch point that would have a devastating effect if it's shut completely. But do we think it's going to shut completely? No. It's a spasm, and it's a symptom of this tension that's rising in the Gulf that has an economic ramification, but it's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue remains trade between US and the rest of the world. ESG is integrated into all our investment teams, and it's not an extraordinary act. In other words, we don't have an ESG team and a team of people who do, the kind of bad stuff. We have a team of people who look from a 360 perspective at the investments we're making.
You quite rightly said that inclusive capitalism and sort of SRI type fixed income are quite different but related. Yesterday's conference, I think the concept of SRI or social responsible investing or green bonds came up, I think, in every panel, and not even scripted. So it's obviously at the forefront of people's minds. So where do you think this momentum is coming from, this in SRI, in social responsible fixed income? Is it coming from, as I said, ground up, or is it coming from you guys and the actual sort of bond issuers themselves and governments?
I think there's a generational change amongst investment professionals. That's one thing. I mean, my older colleagues are different from my younger colleagues, frankly. There's a diverse, again, we need to drive diversity in our investment business. I think that's helpful in understanding these issues as well. In Europe, it's a customer-driven issue. In the US, not so much, apart from the public funds. But from investment professionals, there's a realization that these intangibles matter more than we thought. And embracing them is becoming a normal act.